Good afternoon all and welcome to the Rise and Rise of Interactive Video webinar. My name is Nathan and today we're joined by Laura Estrella, Senior Lead Learning Designer, Pete Smith, Technical Team Lead, and James Corey Wright, Head of Learning Design.
Hello, I'm James. Thank you very much, Nathan, for that introduction. Welcome to you and thanks for joining us in this webinar, The Rise and Rise of Interactive Video. Well, why the title, The Rise and Rise of Interactive Video? That's because over the past 2 or 3 years, we think that the use of interactive video has in fact been increasing, perhaps not as quickly as one would like and perhaps not as quickly as one would expect, but it has been sort of continuing to rise. And in fact, over the past 18 months or so at Kineo, for example, we've produced now over 30 interactive pieces of interactive video content, and we have plenty more in production. So the rise is steady, but probably not as dramatic as one would like. Okay, so on to what we'll be covering today. What are we going to cover? I'm going to kick off with a sort of quick review of some interactive video content, kind of from sort of loosely from a design perspective, but just to give you a flavor for some of the things that we've done. Estrella is then going to take us through a design workout, looking at some real, sort of actual real-time examples, and taking us into sort of areas of, doing it yourself to a certain extent. And then we'll close with a bit of question and answer at the end. We've also got Pete Smith here, who, as Nathan said, is our technical lead. And he's going to sort of lurk around in the background all the way through as a kind of as our expert. And so he's going to be picking up your messages if you put them into chat, and hopefully like an agony aunt, really. And if you could see him, I think it's more on the agony than the aunt.
You say the nicest things, James. Thank you so much.
But Pete's looking. Sorry. So please chat. Use the chat all the way through, and we'll try and pick up your messages, and Pete will answer them, or we will. Okay. So very quickly then. Just why on earth do we use interactive video in the first place? These are all very good reasons. I think if they have one sort of thing in common, really, it's the fact that it's all about engagement. It's all about trying to immerse the user, the learner, in the experience in order to facilitate learning. I mean, that's what they all have in common, really. Perhaps the most significant one is actually the last one, which is that interactive video is a really good opportunity for allowing people to practice in a safe environment, to make mistakes, to find out, to have another go, and hone even skills, so certainly comprehension and understanding, and also by the same token, as I think is true of interactive video in general, is that it's underexploited, and this is probably one of the most underexploited aspects of the medium, because really one would expect to see more use of real life video and scenarios and simulations than is the case. If anything, we kind of split. Arguably, we do more drama videos, but I think that's a missed opportunity. And that as we look ahead, I think the interactive video has to go more real life and film the real world. It's a more cost-effective way of doing things, apart from anything else. And you can make good use of the interactivity, particularly in the way that I've just said, enabling people to practice in a safe environment. We'll look at, we've got one example coming up. Okay. So I said I'd look at it from a slightly designy point of view as a kind of way of structuring this quick review. These are the kind of main headline features of interactive video when you're kind of deciding what approach to take in design terms. Branching has been around for 30 years. The early interactive video, 30 years ago on laser discs and all that sort of stuff, it always really kind of meant branched learning, branched scenarios, branched video. That still holds today. It's still very much the backbone of interactive video, but it's now joined increasingly by hotspots. That is relatively new still. though again, it's very much part of the mainstream application of interactive video. We'll look at them in a second. We have visible hotspots and invisible hotspots. I've mentioned animation because I didn't want us to forget it. I haven't actually got any examples here, but also interactive video is a fantastic opportunity for applying some of the benefits of game mechanics. And again, Estrella will, when she picks up the second half of this, will be showing you and sharing with you an example of something that's really quite gamified. And Peter's here specifically today also to talk us through another sort of development in the evolution of interactive video, which is the sort of bringing in the social learning dimension using technologies. That's social learning using technology to facilitate that. Okay, so branching. I've kind of identified two sort of main strands of branching. A certain amount of, to a certain extent, we don't really drive this. It's more a case of me picking up on the way things have evolved, because we've got lots of designers producing, doing lots of content in different teams. And I've sort of picked up on, and clients want different things. Branching has kind of evolved to a certain extent. So the first kind of branching is probably what's becoming the most dominant. I'm not saying it's the best, but it's certainly a very dominant way of doing things. And it's branching where, as you go through a piece of video, you get feedback as you go. So first example is about performance conversations. So you've got a very conventional introduction here. You start the video and we see a piece of video action. We're watching it. We can pause the video. We click on the question mark there because we know we're going to be asked a question. Move to the next screen. We're asked the question. It's a classic multiple choice question. We answer. Then we get feedback. The feedback's from an expert who sort of knows what they're talking about and gives you feedback on your response and can send you back to have another go, or you can move on to the next piece of the action. And so that's using dramatized video and punctuating it with questions to help you basically learn, and giving you those kind of insights from an expert before you move on to the next part of the drama. It doesn't branch particularly in the sense of branching off into different parts of different dramatical consequences of your decisions. Which is the archetypal kind of thing that you think of when you think of branched interactive video. It doesn't, and that's probably, quite frankly, because of, as much as anything else, budget. You've got to be sort of mindful. If you do, branching introduces quite an increase in the amount of video that you have to shoot. But also, you have to make your decisions about where you're going to put your money. And there's quite a lot of benefit in bringing in that expert perspective. I think it's a bit sad, though, in a way, because it is interactive video, but in a way it's a bit more like interrupted video, which isn't quite as good. So I'm a bit disappointed there. It works really well. It's a really good starting place, but it's a very shallow and quite sort of functional form of branching and indeed use of the medium. But nonetheless, if I'm really honest, we've done quite a lot of content like this because it's what people need and want, and it matches people's budgets. And I think one of my big things with interactive video, one real myth about it is that it's really expensive. It's a myth to say it's expensive, because it's only expensive if you decide and choose to shoot expensive video. Otherwise, it's not expensive at all. These sorts of examples are, even where there's a bit of dramatized video, it's kept to a minimum, and it's quite a cost-effective approach. Okay, so moving on, here was another example of the same thing. This was a short piece of content about helping charity volunteers in how to handle the public. So we'll quickly walk through this. This is a bit of, now what I like about this is it's not dramatized. This is kind of real-life video shot on an English high street, and woven in with a bit of improvise. I think actually this is an actor. So So it's a mixture of real life, just a single actor playing the part of a member of the public, but you could have improvised it, I guess. They speak to you, and another feature, big feature of interactive video is it's really good for first person point of view, putting you out on the spot and having things happen to you, people talk to you and all the rest of it. And then that's punctuated by a question. What should you do? What's the best thing to do here? And then you get, you respond and you get feedback. And here you don't even get video feedback. You can have some text feedback. So you get it's got this element of interrupted video. But it works very well. So that was one kind of branching. The other kind of branching, which I haven't got an example of today, but we have done quite a lot of, is a slightly more gamified approach where you kind of go through the scenario or the situation. You respond. It stops at various points. You put on the spot. You give an answer, and then you are branched off to some video, but you're not given feedback as to whether that was the right or the wrong thing to do. You only get feedback at the end of the storyline, and then you might want to go back and do the whole thing again in a different way. So that's quite different. We looked at branching where you get feedback constantly as you go, which is incredibly valuable and useful. Or you can have the other approach where you don't get feedback until you've been through the whole situation. Okay, so those are a couple of examples.
Also,
sorry,
just
Pete.
Sorry, James, for breaking a flag. Just to pick up on your earlier points, you're absolutely right that the reason that we don't tend to do any kind of deep branching with our interactive video isn't really a technical constraint, because we can. All that we do when we hit a branch point is jump people off to a different video or a different point in the same big video. It is much more of the practical constraints, the fact that you have to shoot so much more video. And also the fact that it's quite difficult to know that a lot of the video that you shoot isn't going to be seen by people in one of those deep branching scenarios. People would have to go back and deliberately pick all the different routes through to actually see all of it. So it does feel like a much less cost-effective solution when you do that. But it's totally technically possible.
Thanks, Pete, for that positive vibe. That's really good. And so that's branching, and we've, like Pete said, it's all about balancing that kind of your creative instincts with the pragmatic considerations. Hotspots, that's another one. It's a big one. We've got visible hotspots and invisible hotspots. A good example of visible hotspots was Rolls-Royce Black Badge, a very sumptuous piece of interactive video indeed. Right from the start, actually, you can see what I mean by hotspots. We've got the icons on the screen there to kick it all off, and then you go in. The video runs, and icons appear at various points in the action, and you can click on them in order to drill down and explore and find out more. Have other video clips or other media assets come up, and so on and so forth. Or you get questions posed which you have to answer, and then, as I say, so that's this picture here the screen here is a really good example of that there's the action, and the little icon, the hotspot, basically is shown to you, inviting you to drill down into another piece of video. Rolls-Royce Black Badge is a really good example. Again, I'm going to try and sort of touch on cost, but even as we go, there's a very good example of reusing existing video footage. This was one where there was already very slick, as you can see, marketing film available, and we basically just took it and adapted it, made it interactive. So that's another kind of very cost-effective source, is look for video that already exists, and then ask yourself whether you could be quite creative about it. Can you put a kind of interactive sheen over the top? Make it interactive, and that is, there's so much video out there already that there's often opportunities for that. Okay, here I mentioned invisible hotspots. Obviously, they're particularly good for assessments, hazard spotting, all that kind of thing. So by invisible hotspots, I mean that the video runs. There are hotspots in the video, but you can't see them. So there's a really good example here. Is I can't remember what we're doing. We're looking for hazards, actually, I think. And again, it's real world footage. This wasn't expensive to shoot. It's real life. Up the top of the screen, sorry if you go back, Nathan, there's the top of the screen is a kind of lifeline, so you're looking, you're looking in this sequence, you're looking for 5 hazards which you've got spot, and as you come across them, it will indicate that you have or you haven't. Okay, so we're going through, and sometimes I mentioned drill down. Sometimes you can click on the screen and it'll take you off to another piece of video, and then you can come back again to the main action. And there's another example of that first person point of view again, surrogate kind of journey through the environment, looking for hazards, basically. Another really good example of basically being able to use interactive video to kind of enable people to do things in a safe environment before taking it out into the real world. Okay, and then you can have some, you can have conventional sort of e-learning style questions at the end. You can intercut that if you want to get a kind of, in a way, e-learning meets interactive video. It can be done. I'm personally not a big fan. I think you should, if you go interactive video, you should just go video. I mentioned gamification. Australia's going to cover that in a second. Moving on quickly to social. Increasingly, we're sort of trying to work out ways of weaving in social learning. I think we're quite sort of hot on social learning. We sort of want to champion it a bit. I think, as when I say social learning, I mean we all, learning socially is one thing, but it's social learning using technology in order to facilitate that. That's what we really do, I guess. And one example of this social learning is this social multiple choice question, which we've woven into the interactive video using Didact, which Pete will talk about in a second. So if you just see the example, we're in Dario's shoes. So we watch actually I think that's Dario there. We're watching the action. We've watched a bit of video. We're asked for our reaction to that. It's not a multiple choice question in the sense of there's no right or wrong. We were just asked how we felt about the one aspect of the video we've just watched. We respond, strongly disagree or agree. We submit our answer, and it then we are able to have our answer compared with what everybody else who's done that piece of content has, how they've responded themselves. So it's a bit like in the UK, certainly it's that game show where you go, our survey says, so I'm going to bring Pete in here to quickly explain what's going on here, because essentially we're bringing data into, or real-time data, or nearly real-time data, into our courseware here.
Yeah, exactly that. Anyone who isn't from the e-learning world would not be even remotely surprised at this functionality, and the fact that we're talking about it as something new it's actually a bit of a frustration. We've been data starved in the world of e-learning ever since it was first conceived of. And the reason that I say that we're starved of data is because of our old friend, the SCORM standard. So whenever we create bespoke learning content here in Kineo, typically it goes over to a client who has a third-party learning management system, and the only data that we can send and retrieve is information about what that specific learner has done in that specific course previously. So we've got no way of enriching the course content with any external data. To get around this, because I had hoped for years that XAPI will come along and solve all our problems, it hasn't yet. It hasn't had quite the market penetration that we were expecting, although we are seeing more clients coming to us and asking us to implement XAPI in our courses, but it's not quite there yet. So what we've built is a service which sits on a Kineo hosted web server, and it quietly accepts information back from a course, and it will also serve certain pieces of information back up again, and those can enrich the user experience. The example that we've got here is when the learner answers a question, their question response is sent back to the Kineo service, and in exchange the service serves up an aggregated set of results. So how many people doing that course previously have picked each of those responses, and that's what's being shown in the graph. So this user went for option 3, but actually the most popular answer was option 5. So this sort of thing can be used particularly in those kind of social nudge type situations where you're trying to get the learner to reflect a little bit on their preconceptions. It works particularly well with diversity and inclusion style courses where you maybe want to show that anything which is outside the correct norms or patterns of behavior.
Blimey. So the correct norms of human behavior, that is stretching.
Whatever they might be.
Whatever they might be.
Maybe that's a bit of a push. So this is just one way of using Didact. We talk in terms of services. So this is a multiple choice question style service. If anyone wants something else, we could spin up other services. So you could potentially use this for leaderboards. You can very easily use it for content rating type purposes. Anything where you want to store data externally, we can do it with this.
So it's quite exciting in its own right. Didact's quite exciting, but actually, it especially potentially with interactive videos, you've got like sort of interactive video, which is obviously you've got to pre-film it and all the rest of it. But if you bring in this sort of social dimension, you could even sort of dip out and talk about the video. If you got really cross, you could go out and maybe link to have a social dimension to it as well. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. In principle, the
as in social media.
Exactly. Yeah, the complicated bit here is never the technology; it's always data protection rules and all of the infosec type stuff. So yeah, tech-wise, it's easy, but always just come and have a chat to us about the practicalities of implementing it
before you go to prison. Yeah. So you can't be too careful. It's true. But anyway, the world is your oyster. We'll just finish off. So we had that. So, you have the regular piece of interactive video. There was a social dimension coming into it now. And moving on to the more conventional, you get to the end, and then you get some feedback at the end. And that's the end of this example. So I'm going to wrap up my section in a minute. I've just got some tips here, which I thought might be useful to share with you. If you're planning to do some interactive video yourself, and they were all taken from our learner guide. And the learner guide, as you're about to find out, is on offer for you to download from the chat thread. That's coming up any minute now. Nathan has put up the learner guide. It's there, ready for you to download. It's a fantastic guide. These tips alone would be enough to win you an Oscar, or maybe not an Oscar, maybe a BAFTA or an Emmy. And actually, I think there are quite a lot of people calling in from America, so it'd be an Emmy or an Oscar, wouldn't it? And for the UK audience, BAFTA. Right, so that's that little bit of rambling has killed another minute.
Glad we've cleared that up, James. Thank you.
So I would welcome any feedback, any questions. Please feel free to send them in. And that's my quick review.
So
we've got a question here, which I'm going to try and answer. Who's it for? It's a question for Pete, by any chance? What is it? Well, Caleb asks, would the aggregated service provide information from both internal of a single business and for any other business using the same course? Oh, I understand. So do you get that, Pete?
I do indeed. Hi there, Caleb. It depends how it's set up. So it's used at the back end, it uses a course token as the identifier. And so if that course token is used across multiple different courses for multiple organizations, so let's say it's one of the Kineo Essential courses, Essentials Plus, then yes, we could show aggregated information across lots of different clients for that same course.
Anonymized.
What we're actually storing is a string of numbers. For this particular example, we don't need any personally identifiable information, and that's absolutely critical to this because it's a bit like Google Analytics. It's all delivered from the client side, so we try to avoid PII as much as possible. So we could configure it so it pulls data back from lots of different organizations, or we'd set it up so it just came from one. It's entirely up to the client.
Let us know if that answered your question, Caleb, and if anyone else has got any further questions at all or addenda to that. I'm going to pass you over now to Estrella, who's going to, well, Estrella can explain what Estrella is going to share with you. Estrella.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Pete. And thanks, Nathan, who is behind the scenes. I'd like to start with a couple of questions for all of you. Think about them. How do you consume content at home, outside work, in your free time? Is it audio and video driven? Is it in small chunks? Is it voluntarily, or is someone forcing you to consume that content? Is it interesting, engaging? Is it relevant? But most importantly, is it to your taste? Now, think about a TV series that you are watching. When you watch this TV series, what hooks you? What makes you want to watch another episode, the next episode? Basically, what makes you want to come back for more? Now that you have that in mind, think about traditional learning. Traditional learning sometimes includes a bit of video to make it perhaps a bit more interesting, but how about we make it the other way around? How about we apply the same contemporary principles that apply to the content that we consume at home to the learning that you have at work? In other words, how about we create learning that is completely audio and video driven? I'm Laura Estrella. I'm a senior lead learning designer at Kineo. And in the next few minutes, we're going to look at two examples in which we can explore how we can put this into practice. The first example is called Day One, as you can see on the screen. So as our guide says, lights, camera, and interaction. That was a clip of Day One. There will be a link for you to have a go and try yourself this interactive video. But now we're going to talk about what Day One is. What is it? So the official definition is that it's a 20-minute episode of interactive drama in a fictional workplace. It's an awareness-raising piece. In other words, this is an interactive drama video experience for onboarding. As you saw in the clip, it's the story of an apprentice on his first day of his first job. We can see the office. It could be your office or it could be a fictional office. It also shows the interactions of this apprentice with the colleagues. And also you saw some wisdom videos. The purpose of those videos is to show the perspective and the advice of your colleagues before you start work or very early when you join a new job. So now we're going to look at who is Day One aimed at. As you can imagine, Day One is aimed at people who are starting work for the first time. They could be apprentices like Jim, our main character. They could be young people who just finished their A-levels or they just left college. Or it could also apply to graduates. Now, you might wonder why we did this. We were looking at some data from YouGov survey. And from the employer's point of view, we are going to look at two graphs very quickly. So 90% of those employers said that soft skills are important for business success. And from that 97%, 75%, which is the graph on the right, the blue one, say that there is a soft skill gap in the UK workforce, which is quite a large percentage. But now from the employee's perspective, where you have the 5 phases, you can see that 1 in 5 feels really uncomfortable talking about their own soft skills. And in fact, 54% of the people have never included soft skills on their CVs. So as a conclusion from this data, employers say that starters don't come with the required character or soft skills when they come to their first job. So the aim of day one is to raise awareness, to make first starters aware of what is expected from them. So that's the background, but how did we do it? Of course, we use video. We use drama video and documentary video. The drama video was shot in the first person perspective. The documentary video is more in the form of talking head videos. And those are the ones that are going to give advice and to inform the starters about the expectations that their colleagues have. This is a very interesting part because this is the flipping or oscillating scenario. So we have one that we call the warm scenario and the one that we call the cold scenario. As you can see, the warm scenario is full of color. The cold scenario is black and white. You can see that in the warm storyline, Jim, our apprentice, is performing very well. He's engaging, he's paying attention, he's taking notes, he is talking to people, he's listening to what people are telling him. But then in the cold scenario, Jim looks quite worried. And that's because he's being probably quite indifferent with his colleagues. He's not talking too much, he's not taking notes, he is arriving late. So you can tell from this point that the storyline in the cold scenario is going to be shorter than in the warm scenario. And this is a graphic of the structure of day one. So we have, again, the warm scenario and the cold scenario. The warm scenario is the pink one. And then you have the green spots, which are visible hotspots that we're going to look at in a second. And just look at the dotted circles. Those are the invisible hotspots. And then as you can see, you as a learner or the learner who is going through day one, they will be having an oscillating journey. They will be moving from the warm to the cold scenario. And that will give them scores that we are going to look in a second. And at the end, they are going to get a badge and some feedback depending on how well they did or the other way around. We have gamification elements throughout day one. Every time that they do something or they don't do something, they get points. They get points if they maybe engage with one of their colleagues, if they take notes, and they get these points by selecting visible or invisible hotspots. They also get feedback at the end, and also they lose points if they don't engage with colleagues or if they don't select anything. At the same time, if they don't select or if they try to guess what they need to select without really thinking before selecting something, they also lose points. You can have a go when you go to day one. Day one also has a lot of room for customization. For example, the wisdom videos they are real people, but they could be people who work in your office. They could be actors, they could be real people, the advice that they are giving in this prototype applies to different industries, so we can keep them as well. We can add badges. We currently have episode 1 available that you can have a look at. But in the future, we are planning to create more episodes. So potentially after you complete all the episodes and get all the badges, you get a qualification. And we might even be able to add a scoreboard or maybe a leaderboard.
It is a prototype.
Yes. And we could potentially include social MCQs, as Pete and James were saying. And this would be the entire blend. So we have episode 1, you get a badge, and then we have the remaining episodes of the full season. And at the end, you get your big qualification when you are ready to go to work. And that's it. That was day 1. So now in the second part, I know that many of you are from different industries, or maybe you work with clients from different industries. You might be multinationals, you might be a small business, but your clients might be multinationals. So you might have offices in one place or in many places, your clients as well. So culture is a very important thing here, because we know that speaking another language is not enough, especially if you want to go and do business in other cultures. So cultural inductions become very relevant. So what am I going to propose here? I'm going to invite you to travel with us. In this case, because I'm from Mexico, I'm going to invite you to travel to Mexico. And we are going to create a survival guide to get by in Mexico. So imagine you are going to go and do some businesses, or you are going to send someone, but they need to have a cultural induction, because doing business in different cultures is just very different. So we are going to look at some details. And that's where Mexico is, in a map. And then who is this going to be aimed at? So this is going to be aimed at travelers. It could be for holidaymakers, families, groups, students, expats, and even diplomats. But primarily, this is going to be for people traveling with business purposes for work. And why? Why would we do something like this? Well, maybe you can look at and get a lot of information from guidebooks, blogs, online, travel guides. You can even ask other colleagues, and that's good. You can get a lot of information, but nothing is going to be as precise and as useful as maybe the information that an amigo is going to give you, someone local. So how are we going to do this? We said that we wanted to apply the same contemporary principles to your learning at work, the same principles that that are applied to the content that you consume at home. So we're going to use interactive video. We are going to need to create some footage. So we're going to use guerrilla filmmaking. So guerrilla filmmaking is an independent way to do things with whatever you have available. You might have a very expensive and good camera, very good lighting and microphones, and that's great, you can use that, but maybe you only have a phone, and that's okay, because for guerrilla filmmaking, that's enough. The important thing is to get footage that is fresh and real. Real is a very important thing. Then we can also use selfie videos. Again, if you are able to run a very expensive production, you can do and create some talking head videos. But then if we think about how we consume content outside work, how many tutorials have we watched or have people watched? And they are all homemade videos. So we can create selfie videos very easily with a mobile. And also the important thing here is that apart from being a very contemporary style, they have the benefit to be easily updated They are simple, they are fresh, and they are real. And something that I would like to mention here is that sometimes raw and unpolished footage is an advantage because it feels more practical. And instead of recreating reality with expensive production, we can use a more creative and clever design. Sometimes recreating reality creates distance and it might come across as fiction. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create some learning that is completely video and audio driven. You might be thinking about accessibility and possibly translations. So we can include transcripts, of course, and the option to switch on and off subtitles. It could also work in mobile, since we are talking about contemporary styles of consuming content. Now, just focusing on more specific things in terms of design, you might be wondering why we have these mini scenarios regarding water, food, time, fiesta, tequila. So if we're talking about cultural inductions, in this specific case, and it's going to be different in different cultures, in different countries, in different areas. In Mexico, life revolves around food. And it's not just about food, it's also about people and life itself. And this is reflected at work. So first of all, your mini scenario, you know that you don't need to drink. You cannot drink tap water. So that would be like a first mini scenario. But then if you are at work and somebody invites you to have lunch with them, maybe here you would say no, and that's okay because you are busy. But in Mexico, if you don't accept that invitation at work, it can look really bad. And especially if you are doing business there, it might not be the best thing to do. Or even if you go but you don't eat and you are there just for a drink, that's also an important thing that you need to take into account. Then time, the concept of time, that's really important because time is perceived in a very different way. And especially if you are going to go and do business in Mexico or in Latin America, you need to know that time is relative. And then fiesta, you might be surprised. When you get there, maybe in your first week, you might meet people, they might invite you for lunch, you might have some meetings, etc. But then they might invite you to a family party at the weekend, which might be a bit strange. But it's normal to accept, and you just go and meet the family of your colleagues. So that's something that you can include in your video. Tequila. That's important. That's related to business as well. So if you do tequila shots, never do that in Mexico. Tequila is a very exquisite drink for Mexicans. So that's an important point that we would probably include in the video.
No slammers.
No, don't do that. So you can imagine that all of these clips are going to be very colorful. They need to be real. Of course, you can create very advanced video production, but you can also recreate or just basically film reality in Mexico. And as we are going to show you now, we have some clips that I just recorded with my mobile for some of these scenarios. So now you can imagine those clips in an interactive video. So for example, you are going to get some taco points, depending on how well you do. So for example, if you do tequila shots with your colleagues, unfortunately, you are going to lose points. But if you accept an invitation to a family party on your first week at work there in Mexico, you might get additional points. And now, talking about feedback, we can even include holistic assessment. And this is a very interesting part, and this is the last part. So once your learner goes through the interactive video, get some points, etc., at the end, they are going to get their readiness profile, how ready they are to go in that trip. So for example, we are going to compare knowledge versus behavior. So if you can see the white skull, that's someone who really has little knowledge about the other culture and is not displaying the right behavior. That's why the score is quite low. In comparison to that, you can see the pink skull, and that belongs to someone who has a lot of knowledge of the other culture and is displaying the right behavior. So it's probably a very experienced traveler. On the other hand, you can have the green skull, and that's someone who knows a lot about other cultures, but is not displaying the right behavior. So you can tell that this could be quite dangerous because although that person might be very academic, they don't know how to behave in other cultures, or they might not be as experienced. And lastly, the blue skull, that's someone with very little knowledge about the other culture, but is displaying the right behavior. So that's probably not as dangerous because you can go and have the right behavior, you are an experienced traveler, and then you just need a bit more knowledge. So you can see how you can help different learners depending on their profile. And that's it from me. Gracias.
Thank you, Estrella. That's great. So I suppose the question with that is, are those clips available as well to download? They're not. But I suppose the question to ask yourself there is, Estrella's put that raw footage that she shot on the phone out there, and the challenge, which is to help people, come to get to grips with a different culture. And you can ask yourself, how would you have made that interactive? So even when the camera moved along the different, what were they? Was it food? It was like soup or something.
The salsa.
Oh, salsa.
Spicy salsa.
I'm already red skull. I think that should be compulsory for foreign secretaries, this course. But I'm not foreign secretary. But you could see how you could, as the camera moved across those salsas, yes, you could click on them, for example. So it'd be quite good fun to go back and look at the record. I don't suppose you will, but you might want to go back, look at the recording, have a look at that little footage again, and just ask yourself, how would you make that interactive in order to achieve the goal that Estrella has kind of setting out there. Anyway, so thank you very much for that deconstructed challenge to make an interactive video at minimal cost. It was all on the mobile phone. I think we've out of time. We've got a couple of questions we'd like to pick up. One from David Dunn. Hello, David. You say, I'd prefer not to host the video product in an LMS. Is there more functionality if we hosted with you? That's one for Pete.
It's a very good question. It kind of depends on your reason for not hosting it in a learning management system. So whether it's just learner access or whatever that might be. So I don't know, David, if you can quickly type your reasons in, because that would affect my answer.
Okay.
The very short, very generic one is that obviously we do get a bit more flexibility, but you also need to think about how you're controlling access to the content and how you can let people in.
Okay, so while Pete continues to sit on the fence, we field another question from Caleb. This is it's more of a comment really, and a good one. I think we should bottle Line of Duty for an interactive video. I don't know, that's certainly a UK orientated point, but Line of Duty, yeah. And the key to that, I totally agree actually. It's a sort of phrase, I don't know if it really exists, but the word adrenalize comes to mind. Yeah, certainly with Line of Duty, one thing it had was plenty of adrenaline. And one of the great opportunities with interactive video is to adrenalize learning content. So I'd agree with that. Don't know what any comments from the panel? Oh, hang on, we've got another question. Oh, no, it's Caleb again. Caleb, Caleb asks, what are the best tools for developing interactive video?
Well, no, that is another very good question, Caleb. There are quite a few tools out there now, so third-party tools. What we found is a lot of them are quite heavily focused on the marketing industry, and so they work really well in that kind of context. So you can create quite snappy interactive videos quite quickly, and they'll do clever things like tracking individuals. So it will automatically use things like facial recognition off the back end. So you can get interactive, clickable hotspots for someone's head to find out more about who they are. One that we've used quite a lot in the past is WireWax, which is probably one of the bigger ones in the market. We actually don't use an external tool. We've got our own in-house interactive video technology, which we built because we found one of the common failings of those tools, well, twofold actually. One is that they normally won't let you export all the videos to package them up to live on the learning management system. And the second one is that most of the interactions aren't really learning focused. So it doesn't give you the same flexibility around questions and question types that we can have with Interact. And also with our own logic sitting behind it, we can obviously do a lot more interesting stuff around scoring, branching logic, and those sorts of things.
Okay, well, hopefully there's some decent answers there to questions. David, if you've got that further, if you want to expand that question that you had about the LMSs, please feel free to do so. Very quick point about day one, which you can download from the chat stream. Day one is
sorry, James.
Sorry.
I have to correct you. Not downloads, just view
Sorry.
from the stream.
Oh, rumbled. I'll just get my coat. Yeah, so day one that Estrad was talking about, it is a proof of concept. It's not a finished product. It's an R&D project we did. It's proof of concept. It's about 15 minutes long. Please, it'd be excellent. Give it a try. It's highly interactive. There's lots of scoring in it. It's it's quite gamified, and we really would welcome any feedback that you wanted to send through to us about it, because that's what it's out there for. It's a proof of concept prototype. So please enjoy that. Thank you very much for being here today.